Welcome to the Feisworld podcast, engaging conversations that cross the boundaries between business, art, and the digital world.
We are bound, and not only to ourselves and to those around and close to us and to humanity in general, but we're bound to honor this earth, to care for our planet. The greatest gift is to be able to give. It's just huge. It is one's duty, if you have either the means or the time, to serve in some way, to give as generously as you can, and to give your time. If your kids don't become your colleagues partway through, you've essentially been a failure. The bottom of it all is you really, really have to love two things. And more important than the subject almost is the kid. You have to love them all, and to give them a sense that they can value themselves, you have to value them first.
Hello everybody, this is Fei Wu, and I am here for another episode of the Feisworld podcast. Today I have a very, very special guest whose name is Polly Chatfield. Polly is a teacher and has been since the 1960s. She's also a poet and winner of the National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship for her topic, Patterns of Simile in the Divine Comedy. I met her at the Merrill Speakers Series at Commonwealth School. Without revealing her age, you wouldn't believe me even if I told you. Polly radiates positive energy. She loves her students, and nearly everyone in the event across multiple generations have taken classes with her, including my associate producer and life partner, Adam Leffert. For the first time ever, it's a conversation with three people. Good news is that our voices are quite distinct from one another. I don't think you have a hard time to tell who's who. Oh, by the way, if you didn't know anything about the Commonwealth School, they are an independent co-ed day school for grades 9 through 12, enrolling about just 150 students in 4 grades. They are academically rigorous, catering to bright, curious students who enjoy intellectual adventures in classes often taught at college level. And by the way, they're also very successful, with nearly 75% of the graduating seniors recognized as national merit finalists, semifinalists, or commended students, and some 35% recognized by the AP Scholars Program. For over 20 years, Polly taught various subjects at this very school, including Latin and history. Today, her students walk up to her at the school, on the street, and tell her repeatedly how she changed their lives forever. Most of them have children, some have college-aged children. I met a few who now work at the New York Times or the Supreme Court. They hugged and kissed Polly as if time never left. As an outsider of Commonwealth School, I had always been curious with their community. So small, yet it creates such synergy decades after people already graduated from the school. At this point, I've had a long-standing history with the Commonwealth School as a podcaster or interviewer who have spoken with a few graduates, including Vaughn Lee, class of 1988, Julia Holloway, class of 1984. By the way, both of them not only remember Polly vividly, but also are involved in the alumni committee at Commonwealth School, where Polly continues to contribute significant effort on a regular basis. Polly took us to so many places in this conversation, and it doesn't stop short at the Commonwealth School. Much of what I learned is about a woman's life, who overcame so many hardships while keeping her head up high and didn't forget for a second that she could still be funny, lighthearted, and strong. I also learned about history, what it was like to grow up as a woman in the 50s and 60s, and I thought about how I want to be a parent one day, the value I want to instill in them. First, I want to read to them a lot, not just at bedtime. Second, I hope they choose to give back to their community and help people in need. Polly has never stopped doing that. She volunteers at various organizations today, including an after-school program where she teaches underprivileged children how to read and write. It's not possible for me to summarize it all here, and I hope you enjoy this conversation and share with others who might want to listen. If you like this story, you might find just a few others that interest you on Feisworld. I'm currently putting in some effort in building an online community, so hop over to facebook.com/Feisworld and you will see updates from me just about a couple of times a week. Without further ado, please welcome the one and only Polly Chatfield to the Feisworld podcast. I'm so happy to be here, Polly, and just walking through your apartment and just looking at all the books and made me feel like this is so alive.
I'll give you a whole armful when you leave. Like, they just collect.
Yeah. I mean, they're beautiful. And as I mentioned before, I grew up in a household full of books, and something that is very intimate. I feel that's very familiar to me. But we met at this one of the many wonderful Commonwealth events just a few weeks ago. And I remember when Adam, my co-producer on the show, who's also in the room here with us, mentioned to me, said, Polly is, one of my favorite teachers of all time. And literally 5 seconds later, you walked over, tapped on the shoulders and said, I recognize you from the back of your head. and then we exchanged conversation in the busy room for 30 seconds. And I thought to myself, I want to be like you when I grow up. And I feel like we're all there in people's lives for even a brief moment. There's a very clear purpose. And I've come across another gentleman previously at a job that I had, and Matt Lindley, I said, I want to be like him when I grow up. But then there's you. There's a very special energy and bond. And so thanks so much for having us at your lovely home.
Oh, you're dear. When I think of how much my students have given me over the years, a chance to be part of their lives at a crucial moment, I think 10th grade, which I particularly love. That age is when people discover that they're a who, and a particular kind of who, and it's a privilege to be part of that discovery.
Wow. So, Adam, when did you start learning from? I want to say Polly, but really is Miss Chatfield.
Oh, come on,
Polly.
I've got to get.
I think 9th grade. I ended up studying Latin for 7 years. I wanted to keep going, but they made me take calculus, which, for the record, if you're not going to be an engineer, no, you don't need it in real life, it turns out. Should have kept going. But I believe it was 9th grade Latin. And also history and art history.
It was a Renaissance.
Renaissance.
Renaissance, yeah. And I didn't have you for English. No.
Then who did? Oh, John Hughes in 9th grade.
Yeah.
I remember a lot of, I guess maybe there were corrections on papers, which I've passed on to other people.
Oh, PGPs.
Yeah. I felt like I had an English education, even if not under that rubric, under that title.
Oh, when somebody made the same mistake over and over, you've got to imagine how a teacher gets irritated. Mm-hmm. And John Hughes, instead of saying that he was irritated, he put next to these mistakes PGPs, which meant Polly's grumbles. Yep. Polly Chatfield's grumbles.
I feel like I'm a secondhand English learner from one of your students, in this case, Adam. I've arrived at this in this country when I was just 16, and my English was considered pretty good, and I really faked my way through fairly comfortably in China. I would literally just make up English words and grammar nobody would know.
Well, even English speakers wouldn't. The poor people who have to learn English, it's so full of diverse influences. And the way Anglo-Saxons conjugated their verbs and the way Latins conjugate their verbs are so different. And all of that is feeding into English in ways that I wonder that ESL people don't just throw up their hands and say somebody else should do this.
My mom is certainly one of those people who ready to invent her own grammar.
Yeah.
But I've benefited so much, and it's so funny that I've known Adam for 13, 14 years. And my English has improved drastically over that period of time, including when I was in college and really struggled. I decided that I was, not that I was so cool, but since I'm in this country anyway, I wanted to learn English with regular American students. So I gave up my privilege to learn with the other ESL students. And my grades, it was such a struggle. But then, Adam came into my life and taught me so much, not just specific words, but and the Latin was, my God, if I could just hit a button to say how many times the word Latin even comes up, probably tens of thousands, no joke. But he was able to teach me a way of thinking and learning about the language and really having the structure to it and be able to memorize it so much more easily because there's a Latin root to it. And then 14 years later, and I met you, and I realized, oh no, it all makes sense.
Well, I'll tell you something about me and languages. We had a year in Rome in 1973, 74, with all the children, and I had to learn Italian to function, to buy the groceries, to get the children doctor's appointments, to get shoes, God knows what, and so I learned by the seat of my pants. And my oldest daughter, who was majoring in Italian at Connecticut College, and that year went to the Università per Stranieri in Perugia for her junior year and speaks beautiful Italian, was heard to say, "You think mother's speaking Italian until you listen closely." I had the song all right, but I didn't have constructions. I just had to learn to get by in a big hurry.
But I wonder, I heard this story of yours on YouTube. I think it was recorded in 2014, and it was during one of the stand-up sort of moth-like Commonwealth School storytelling session. I'm not sure if that video is even on YouTube, but it is. And that was one of my very kind of a window into who you are, your life. And, you told us about the story that happened in 1947.
When I worked that summer, I worked 3 summers in a row at the Trapp Family Music Camp. I'd gone up the first summer as sort of my younger brother's chaperone. He's very musical, but he had asthma and he couldn't go to real camp. And my mother thought it would be wonderful to go to this music camp. Well, it turned out that everybody there was sort of middle-aged, either spinsters or older men looking for spinsters. and they were all singing. They were all directed. The director of the Trapp Family group would take you through a Mozart mass or a Brahms something or another. But I rapidly discovered that college students were working in the kitchen and the dormitories, and my little brother discovered the youngest of the Trapp boys, and he went off into the woods with him, and I started working in the kitchen. And I just became very close to the family.
Wow.
And was right behind you on the Dutch cupboard in the middle shelf right there. You see that photograph?
Wow.
There I am as a bridesmaid, Erica and Werner's wedding.
Wow.
That's me.
Oh my goodness. Wow. It's when you said 1947, that's the number I remember because that's the year my dad was born.
Yeah.
And when I hear that, it's like, wow, all these different moments happening.
So I had just these wonderful summers being with the family, singing in between these things, like these 10-day sing fests. there was 4 days to clean up the place and then to have fun. And we would go climbing Mount Mansfield or go swimming in some waterfall someplace or sing with the family as they practiced for concerts.
Wow.
And I remember once we were in the rec hall, and I was up on a riser, and there was some, in the soprano section, there were others behind me. We were doing a Mozart mass, and I was singing better than I had ever sung. It was quite wonderful. And because there was this woman behind me with a glorious voice, turned out it was Roberta Peters before she was discovered, but her voice coach had brought her up to visit the family. And if you're next to somebody who is trained and can open their throat and sing, oh boy,
Yeah.
it happens to you sort of momentarily in this most wonderful way.
That's so true.
I had the same experience very briefly. One of our other guests and a friend of mine for over a decade is an opera singer, Barry Alexander, who I've known since the 90s, who Faye's now working with. And when we first met, and opera, honestly, I'm really not connected to in any way, and I can't even carry a tune. My college roommate has often bragged that I can sing the national anthem in 5 or 6 keys at once. Because in school, you're freshman, your orientation.
I know all about that.
He's now a professional actor and singer, and I can just switch keys in every few notes. But yeah, stand this way, breathe this way, and in my entire life, one note. My friend Barry, he's like, do this, do that. And one operatic note came out of me, and I was so shocked that it all completely came crashing down. But I had that experience even for only that moment.
It's true. For me, it's like a tennis game. That's a game I've never, ever mastered. But when I play with someone who knows what he or she's doing, your game and you learn that for life.
Yeah. Well, my father was tone deaf, and he used to sing us Harvard football songs. And when I went to my first Harvard football game, I was amazed because those were the words I knew, but that sure wasn't the tune. So
it's the opposite of Italian. You had the tune for Italian, but not the words. He had the words for the songs, but not the tune. It all fits together.
So Polly, I wonder what you were like as a little girl, and I'm looking at this picture. What are some of the memories that you've had maybe right around that time that make me wonder, is this sort of this vast knowledge that you have for Latin, for appreciation too, for language, for history, for arts, and what made you decide to want to be a teacher, and not only a teacher, but subject matter of so many?
Gracious. Well, first off, books were part of my childhood. Our parents read to us every evening. I mean, not just the bedtime stories upstairs in bed, but after dinner, we would be gathered in the living room and be read to them. And it was really for the older ones. I was number 5 in a family of 6. And the reading then was for my older brothers and sisters, Dickens and whatnot, Jane Austen, whatever, like that. So I had that. And then I went to strict convent school, but it was a very dedicated order of teaching nuns. And we were made to memorize quite a lot, which was poems and things like that, not algebra rules, but lovely bits of text that we could carry with us. And I remember one of the nuns saying, the things you learn now, you'll be able to say when you're 80. And you may not keep things all through your life, but you'll keep the things you learn earliest. And it's true. And my mother used to make us memorize too, so that I've got a bunch of poems in my head still. And then I married a teacher right out of college. As a matter of fact, I was young going to college because I'd learned to read when I was 4, so they made me skip first grade. And I was in college when I was 16.
Wow.
And I met him as a blind date for the Harvard-Yale game when I was a sophomore. And he decided right away he was going to marry me. I gave him up for Lent year after year, but to no avail.
But he knew that he wanted to marry you at the game?
He knew that very day of the blind date. He went home and told his parents that he'd met the girl he was going to marry. And I was only just 18, I hadn't the faintest idea, and I lived this very sheltered life. I'd never been on a date before I went to college. I didn't even wear a bra. My first roommate in college was horrified. I was such a rube. And so we were married. He was drafted for the Korean War. As soon as he got out of basic training, he was sent to Fort Sam Houston to teach, because he was already a teacher. And so he did nothing but teach all his 2 years of being drafted. And we had children. We had 5 children. He came back and was teaching at the Gunnery, a school in Connecticut, and then taught out at in north of Illinois, in Winnetka and North Shore Country Day. And I did a little Latin tutoring then, because I majored in both English and Latin in college, but the notion of teaching. But then he died, and I applied to colleges all around, particularly in the Chicago area, but I didn't. My younger brother, encouraged me to apply to Harvard, and I got in. So I came and was, the oldest graduate student in my group by a long shot, because most of them were fresh out of college.
You mean like a master's degree?
Yeah, I was to get a master's degree. And to where I worked on, I didn't get a PhD, but I passed my orals and I was working on a thesis. In my second year as a graduate student, I met this other aged graduate student. I gotten into a seminar in the 6th book of the Fairy Queen, and the prerequisite was you've read the whole of the Fairy Queen. Well, nobody's read the whole of the Fairy Queen. You read book 10 in English, and that's it. So I was reading the Fairy Queen every minute. I went across from Widener Library to this restaurant called the University Restaurant, which we all call the Unrest. I sat at the counter, I was reading the Fairy Queen, and my sandwich came, and I pushed the copy over, and there was another copy of the Fairy Queen. And behind it was this nice man who said, "I see you're reading the Fairy Queen." And I said, "I'm a widow with 5 children." I was so afraid that I'd get to like somebody, and he would get to like me, and he didn't know what I came with.
Wow.
But that didn't seem to keep him from talking to me. And he showed me pictures of his 2 kids. He was divorced. His wife had left him, and he had 2 young children. And we were married the following summer. And he went to teach at Commonwealth School. And I went to be a teaching fellow, which I'd already signed a contract to. In the middle of the second year, he came back from school one day and said, "Would you like to teach English and Latin at Commonwealth?" And I said, "Would you like me to teach English at Commonwealth?" And he said, "I wouldn't have brought the message from Mr. Merrill if I hadn't wanted you to."
Wow.
So that's how I got to teach at Commonwealth School.
What year was that when you first started?
I had done, actually, we had a dear friend, Seymour Alden, who was one of the founding teachers of Commonwealth, who taught the Latin. And in the fall of 67 and into 68, he was quite sick. He was dying, actually, of pancreatic cancer. And I took his Latin classes. It was able to fit in and around what I was doing at Harvard, because it was teaching expos and I could fiddle with the schedule at Commonwealth, not with the Harvard schedule, and teach. So I had taught. So Charles knew I could teach Latin if he wanted another Latin teacher, and they had somebody for a year in between who was not very comfortable. I don't know whether it was the ethos of Commonwealth or what, but anyway, he decided it was not for him, and Charles sent the message home by my Charlie, and so there I was, and that was the spring of. It must have been the spring of 68, because he was not coming. That guy was not coming back.
Wow, 68 you started.
Yeah. So I was already involved in Commonwealth life, coming up en masse, all 7 children sleeping in the barn for Hancock and all of that. So I was very much, in there already, going to plays and all this stuff. But I only knew you guys from the outside, not the in.
Wow. What really amazed me in that story is, so you went from raising 5 children on your own to now a household of 7 children. Mm-hmm. And what was that dynamic like? I don't know how old your children were at the time versus your husband's.
When Charlie and I were married, Roger was 5. My stepson Hugh was 6. Peter was 7. My stepdaughter Sarah was 8. Callie was 10. And Barbara was 12 and Michael was 13. So it was little kids and a teenager, 2 teenagers really. Charlie was a saint. He was an absolute saint and a dear, dear, precious man.
I remember.
Wow.
Just love. No kissing in the corridors was his.
Which was often obeyed. Not completely, but...
Well, that's what I would swing by his office and just blow him a kiss.
You guys? I thought
yes,
you meant us.
No, us guys. And Charlie would say, no kissing in the corridor.
And that was to keep you guys under control.
That's right. To give a good example.
Oh, wow.
Don't you remember Eric courting Judith? Were you there then? No.
I remember them being a couple. There's two English teachers.
Yeah. Well,
actually, yeah, I think
there
I remember.
Was a certain amount of kissing in the corridors with them.
I remember the end of it.
Very, very precious. We were all watching this love affair begin to blossom.
Wow. But before we move on I have so many questions for Commonwealth School. And, I've known Adam for a long time, but I have not been really deeply involved with Commonwealth until maybe the summer, spring of 2011. Mm-hmm. And the reason was because I started hosting like an art workshop, which turned into a summer internship for high school students, particularly around design. And that's when I met Larry for the first time. Mm-hmm. I decided to combine students from Newton North High School with Commonwealth School, which was literally down the street from the office I was working at Sapient, and just kind of open up their eyes to say, like, don't be scared. In some cases, don't be ashamed to be an artist. Express yourself. These are all these options. Look at these are real artists. They have jobs. They're getting paid well. But that's basically kind of my way into getting to know the community. And I was just so in awe, like in so many ways, because it's such a eclectic group of people that I got to interact with, even though the place is so small that most people don't even know that even today there are maybe just a little over 100 students.
150 maybe.
143.
It's the smallest, one of the smallest schools that I've ever come across. And from 1968 till I believe that maybe you retired right around 1990?
1990. In June of 1990 at graduation, he retired. And I stayed on for half a year as mentor to a young English teacher and did some expos and stuff, but not just... I was just in the background. Judith had just come on, and Charlie felt it was very important that we both leave together and not have me be there to be somebody to be complained to about how the new head wasn't doing this or that, And he was right, though I hated it. I really did not like to stop teaching. I still miss it. I'm tutoring now at the school where Barbara is a librarian because I miss it still.
It's wonderful.
Well, where are you tutoring right now?
I'm tutoring at the Community Charter School of Cambridge. It's Cambridge's only charter school. Oh. And my oldest daughter, class of 71, is librarian there. Uh-huh. And it's 99% under the poverty, no, 99% minority, 97% under the poverty line. And they have to work like Trojans. They take triple math when they come in sixth grade. They have this drop everything and read program and all these honors reading groups. I did one of those last spring. But they have after school, high school and middle school study halls every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I go in and, it's just like the homework project at school. Mm-hmm. They stay and then they can have pizza or something and then they do a little more work and then head for home. My problem is remembering names because names have changed in the last 20 years.
What are some of the names before versus now?
Well, I think the names before are names like Adam and Seth and Tom and John. And I have names like Horace, whom I tutor to last week.
Should be familiar.
Right. Well, that sticks in my head. But some of these others, I had a wonderful girl I worked with a lot last year whose name was Chris Nolly. There was somebody in my reading group whose name was Sequoia. I could connect. But some of these names are so off the wall to this Anglo-Saxon ear that it's very hard to remember them.
Well, I'm so glad you said that because I've been struggling with names at work, outside of work. There's so many names that I never learned in English textbooks when I was in China. And I don't even know how to spell. They're the same name, but they spell differently, like Christina with a Y. And you're like, why would you do that? But
yeah, Jacqueline with W's and things like that. But they're, what they need is half tutoring and half a listening ear or an arm around the shoulder, and to give them a sense that it's possible because they are working so hard. Mm-hmm. And it's a wonderful school. They've had 7 graduations now, and every single kid has gone to college. They haven't all stayed because they don't have the money, and if they don't get a full scholarship, they have to work. And then it's so hard to balance. And mom is working 2 jobs, so they work harder, and then they can't get their college work done. But they were prepared enough to be accepted at college.
I think what's really stunning is what's incredible to be a teacher. And I remember when I was in school, in middle school and high school in China, we have Teachers' Day, by the way, which I was so surprised to find out that doesn't exist in this country. And it's September 10th, conveniently after school starts. And I remember in a classroom of 50 students, and when the teacher asked, who do you want to be when you grow up, nearly 100% will raise their hand to say they want to be teachers. And the reason is because I think there's that, preconception of if you are a teacher, whether your parents read to you, but then when you step on stage, you're instantaneously influencing young adults across the entire classroom and kind of distilling a message, an emotion, whatever that may be, or hope, and then they're able to carry that on. I think it's kind of magical. I mean, have you thought about that at all? And does it occur to you?
No, I somehow didn't think of myself particularly as a figure of authority in the sense of discipline. I did think I knew more than my students. And the thing is, that I really wanted them to know what I knew because it gave me such pleasure, for one thing, to know that sort of stuff and to see how many windows get opened when you know this and to watch the windows getting opened for people.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you described is kind of like making learning not just fun, but a way of approaching how to problem solve in a way that, Adam has just shared. How many books? I mean, how many books he ended up reading, and then even into college to realize, wow, I better stop. It's like this becomes, what was your? I mean, how did it impact you, into your adulthood?
In many ways, going back a little bit, actually, to some of the things that Polly said, I can't claim a difficult background in economic sense, but I think just being that age, being 15, which is magical, but sometimes magical in a spell cast on us sense versus magic of discovery, the sort of warring sides. And I do specifically remember, I told Faye this already, your hand on my shoulder when it came time for the Latin APs, because there was sort of this pride. Commonwealth is not snobby proud in like a fancy clothes sense or in a looking down at other people's sense, but in a hard work sense and kind of going that extra mile. Talk about reading the entire book. So I don't know if I get the numbers right, but was it 1, 2, 4, and 6 of the Aeneid that everybody else read?
Yeah.
And so the advanced placement exam comes up and Mrs. Chatfield says to us, and you're going to take it. And I'm thinking, no, I'm not going to take that because it's 12 books, right? If I remember correctly. And I remember that moment, which is, I guess, 35 years ago, you put your hand on my shoulder and you're like, oh, yes, dear, you are. And then I realized the spell is cast. Yes, dear, I am. And that what I know you know, but maybe aren't saying is at that age, I think everything is chaotic for everybody. So instilling that hope in somebody that comes forward and the joy of the materials and carrying that forward, both the stuff that we read and then as kind of a jumping off point for things to read on your own in the future. I remember the integrity of the primary sources, but being able to feel like you've got, in my sense, not a control of the whole canon, but a sense of it. So almost that's a skeleton. And then as you go forward in your life, you can build on that.
Yeah, and then you can trust your own opinion. That's why the primary sources, that you have a right to think about those things as well as some scholar who's written a book about them. And that's part of the learning who you are. That what I was talking about, why I love the 10th grade, so because you really were fashioning yourselves at that moment. And to be a part of that and see people's faces light up when they discovered something on their own is wonderful.
Absolutely, and I almost sense that there is an obligation. I'm speaking from my own experience as a third generation, really in this case, that I sense that Adam has, and perhaps many of your students sense an obligation to pass that on to people that they know, people who are close to them, people they encounter, and for instance, the reason Adam has been a huge help on my endeavor of trying to be a podcaster, kind of sharing stories of what we call the sung and unsung heroes. And unsung heroes so busy doing what they do, people very much like yourself, and you don't have necessarily the time or energy or resources to really broadcast. I mean, if I had at my own TV station, I would have followed you to the school and to all these after school programs that you're doing, because somehow people can relate to that. And I've heard so many stories, and I was so touched by a very similar story about this teacher. I believe it's somewhere in India or Mexico. These stories of women, after they retire at around age 60, well into their 80s and 90s, sometimes they open up their apartment and invite these students to come in and read, and then they grow up. It just draws tears to my eyes,
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah.
While Faye is recovering emotionally, I'm going to mention something to the audience and to the group, because I don't think it would cross Faye's mind to know to ask it, but I want to say it before I sort of lose the opportunity. I'll make sure I don't get choked up, so we can keep it all together here.
And I'll pick it up from there.
In that time, you talk about the windows opening, or sort of, to me, kind of watching the lights come on. I knew I wasn't all of those things. And honestly, I'm still trying to figure out which of those emotions, ideas, and warring forces I am. But what I remember, which could bring us to discussion of the church or social service organizations. But what I, as somebody who really didn't know what I was talking about or where to go, was a very rare, almost unseen, deep moral sense with no, what I would call, judgment. So that, and I remember, and as listening to things you've mentioned to Faye and thinking back on what, the challenges and kind of turmoil of that time, that everyone knew something that we wouldn't verbalize at that age. I remember the questions and I remember the answers. And I remember coming to you once with something that I felt was a moral question. And I said, okay, is this right or is this wrong? And to this day, I remember your exact answer, which was, don't ask if it's right or wrong, ask if it's wise. And I instantly knew, yeah, it probably wasn't wise. So that sense, to be honest, to be frank, gave me a better sense of religious people, because I had kind of a finger waggy impression at that time, that there was kind of like the librarian shushing everybody and don't do this and don't do that. But a sense of morality and religious morality that really came from a humanism and a humanity, as opposed to a more Santa Claus view of who's good and who's bad, and that's where I got to appreciate religion more, or people who had devoted a lot of their lives to a religious life, or having that be part of their life. So I know kind of how to work into the questions, but I know you do a lot of work with social service organizations, and I know you have, Charlie was a deacon in the church, right?
Well, he was on the vestry of the church.
Vestry.
So that's the Episcopal. And, well, that is something that I came from my parents, who both served on boards of various sorts. And I just thought that was something you just did when it was a sign of being grown up, and it was just something you did. And now I'm distressed because many, many people in their 50s and 60s who should be serving on boards of, I'm on a board of a family services organization, and two actually in Maine. We can't get people to serve. And why, I'm not sure, but I think something has been lost, that sense that it is one's duty, if you have either the means or the time, to serve in some way, to give as generously as you can, and to give your time. If I'm only for myself, what am I? We are bound, and not only to ourselves and to those around and close to us, and to humanity in general, but we're bound to honor this earth, to care for our planet.
Yeah, I think social service has been such a theme on my podcast as well. I've interviewed people across all ages, and a couple of folks there's one who was the president of Digitas, and there's one gentleman, CEO of General Digital, and each one of them have contributed and actively involving not just themselves but people from their company to be involved. Horizon for homeless children, and both Al and I are involved in Friends of Boston Homeless. And there is that tremendous joy when you realize that what you do isn't just for money, and it's your time and your energy spent that's really contributing to the greater goods. And that there's an indescribable amount of joy. I think if people who truly try it, and they will be able to see it for themselves, and it's addictive.
Yes. The greatest gift is to be able to give. It's just huge. And,
there may be some hope. Not to say anything against my generation. So we have nephews that are millennials, that are like early 20s, and one, Sam, who I don't know if he's been involved in many podcast-related things, but has sort of pushed back now that he's working at Sapient, doing marketing, saying, well, millennials aren't all the same. There's no specific kind of millennial. But one thing I've heard about that group as a group is maybe kind of the 60s are coming back, even though some of it is, hashtag activism, some of it's a little bit shallow, that there is a deep sense of caring. If you look at the Bernie Sanders support, whether or not he'd actually be a good president, he certainly seems to care and certainly seems to be trying.
Yeah.
So I guess a two-part question. One is, I think there may be some, the 80s was stereotyped as greedy. In the 90s, a little bit better. And then different economic times, 2003, 2008, made it difficult for people to be generous. Maybe these people that were disenfranchised worse. Dying industries, auto workers, coal miners. But sort of a comment and a question. One is, maybe this next generation is naturally a little more socially conscious. They certainly seem to be. And in the years that you were teaching, I know they're universal. One of the reasons we read the 1,000-year-old things or multi-hundred years, to appreciate that people are the same. But on the flip side of that, have you noticed shifts or changes as you're still teaching between what the students and kids were like through those years and decades? Do you think have you noticed shifts in their spirit or focus or personalities?
Well, I tell you, it was pretty exciting in the late 60s and early 70s, which was all the Vietnam time. And we were so afraid for our kids who wanted to go out on the common and protests and whatnot, or the ones who lived around the square and were in there wanting to protest. And one was both sympathetic to their passion for things and terrified for their lives. I remember once going out to dinner with Charlie. It was on a Sunday evening with some friends in Cambridge, some professorial friends, and we stayed talking there until about 2:30. And I said, Charlie, we're never going to get up tomorrow if we don't go home. But, we were all worried about the kids. And then that seemed to, with the end of the war and the sort of the disillusionment of the Nixon presidencies and Watergate and all of that sense of being involved in deep social issues sort of disappeared. People were saving the whales and stuff like that, which was all very good, but it weren't so passionate about it. and when somebody got up to make an announcement about saving the whales, there would be groans.
Here it comes again.
Yes, she's got a bee in her bonnet about the whales. Then I left school just at a time when there was going to be a new sort of political wave. The last year I was at school, I did a half course in the history of Islam because I thought that was something that people really ought to know a little more about. I didn't realize we were about to get into war in Kuwait and that it was going to be so vitally important, but I did have a sense that part of the world was in turmoil. So I didn't get into the generation that absolutely had to go into finance. Fortunately, maybe I would have saved some of them from the pit. Oh boy!
What about the students in the 80s? Now I think about it. I recently interviewed Ann Spalter, and specifically she mentioned, I think she's probably in a similar class, graduation class as Adam. She's now an artist. And then she did mention early on in her career, I'm trying to calculate, that would be around mid-80s, I guess, mid to late 80s, she felt necessary to get into banking and finance, and how just absolutely miserable she was for those couple of years before she kind of changed course and became an artist. And now I feel like for my generation, graduating around mid-2000, 2005, 6, and then the generation after me, there's a huge shift from what I could observe from I gotta go to Wall Street, I have to do this, and that, and make my $1 million before I turn 30. I feel like all that somehow has more or less vanished.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
I love it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. It was interesting because quite a number. Myra Paci went into film. Sean started to write. There were a number in your class who went that way already.
I wonder, what is it like to teach not only highly intellectual kids coming from highly intellectual families whose parents are incredibly powerful? What was it like to teach particularly these kids at Commonwealth? Was it? I mean, it doesn't appear to me that you're intimidated by that at all.
Well, I never thought about it. They didn't know what I had to teach them, so there they were. They were ready, and the kinds of things they ask and the kinds of things they'd like you to find out more about are stimulating you too to hunt for things and look up special things for them to read or whatever. I mean, it's a two-way street. Teaching is definitely, it's not handing stuff down. It's collegial. If your kids don't become your colleagues partway through, you've essentially been a failure.
Wow. You just answered kind of my next question, which is, I wonder, what was that? Clearly, you're teaching kind of, it's staying with them, with your students, with generations, with their children as well. What are some of the things that you think about in terms of being a successful teacher or having successful students? What do they mean to you?
I think that at the bottom of it all is you really, really have to love two things. And more important than the subject almost is the kid. You have to love them all, and to give them a sense that they can value themselves. You have to value them first.
Yeah, that part is it's so true. Actually, I was just thinking that Adam and I both we met at Taekwondo school, and over the years we actually we've come across a lot of kids who were adopted by these lovely parents, and then I talked to them about literally how old were the kids when they became part of the family, even as a tender age of like 8 months, a year old, because they were neglected. Literally, it produces such trauma in their lives, and these American parents are trying to fix that in a way. They're trying to influence that, and it's really challenging. But I was so fascinated by what you said just now about the interior belief of yourself. Recently we got into Alan Watts, and I'm just every word coming from that man, and it's just so fascinating to me because, like you said, we're getting to know who we truly are. What is our fullest self? And we're constantly told by, I'm a daughter, I'm not yet a mother, and I'm not a sister, I'm the only child, but I'm so many roles to these people, and so much of that is reflected upon me to say, that's who you are, Faye. But who am I really,
Yeah.
And that part is so powerful.
I mean, it's the work of a lifetime to become who you are. If you're lucky, the way I have been, and blessed, you have a lot of love along the way.
To listen to more episodes of the Feisworld podcast, please subscribe on iTunes or visit feisworld.com. That is FEISWORLD, where you can find show notes, links, other tools, and resources. You can also follow me on Twitter at Feisworld. Until next